Welcome to the Unlist. Today we are talking about a fragrance that has more or less been retconned out of existence by Paco Rabanne. It was meant to be the follow-up to their iconic 1973 debut masculine fragrance called Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. Now obviously Paco Rabanne had perfumes before that like Calandre and Metal, but when Paco Rabanne Pour Homme came out, that's when the house was put on the map by guys, since with Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, they effectively took the smell of Irish Spring soap and a handful of earlier German aftershaves, things like Sir Irish Moss by Sear, and turned that into a high-end fragrance. So they legitimized, effectively, that particular style of fougere, and then after that experienced tons of copycatting as brands like Worth and Roger and Gallet, they all attempted to make their own take on that Paco Rabanne Pour Homme style. We also saw the House of Vai try to do that as well. Parfums Vai, they came out with that Vai Pour Homme 1980. It's kind of in between Azzaro and Paco Rabanne, sort of like a lot of copycats. So Paco Rabanne obviously had no real reason to quickly follow up Pour Homme, did they? Such a successful fragrance, they had no real reason to replace it. So they didn't. By the time the fragrance turned 10 years old in '83, it was getting a bit long in the tooth. I mean, you had a lot of fresher fougères coming out to take its place. Azzaro Pour Homme from '78 was much fresher, right? And then by '82, we had Drakkar Noir, which actually the perfumer behind Drakkar Noir is the same perfumer of this fragrance, Pierre Wargnet. And Pierre Wargnet, rest in peace, passed away. Pierre Wargnet created Drakkar Noir in '82 and also created this fragrance, Paco Rabanne's Ténéré from 1988. So the thing is about this perfume, before I show the bottle a little more, is that it was a long time coming, and it was a situation where they bet the farm on a new style emerging that would replace the outgoing style. And they chose Betamax when they should have chosen VHS, right? They chose the Confederacy when they should have chose the Union, right? They bet on HD DVD when they should have chosen Blu-ray. They went with what? You can put any number of cultural or technological things in there. They bet on the losing team, guys, right? They registered with the Whig Party, not realizing that the Whig Party would cease to exist after one president from that party won the office. So, yeah, they really put their chips in the wrong basket there. They thought the future was going to be in fuel cell hydrogen, but instead everybody went battery electric. So there you go. Another example. They went the wrong way. And what happens when you go the wrong way? Well, you become like the Neanderthal, don't you? You become like the dodo. So that is exactly what happened to poor old Ténéré. Was it went down the wrong evolutionary path, and it ended up aborted. This was the shortest lived masculine pillar launch in Paco Rabanne's history, and they retconned it out of existence. So if you go to their website, they don't even mention it. They don't talk about it. It's like it never happened. It's like, don't worry about it. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So a little bit of context before I get into the smell of the fragrance, since I'm sure you want to know what the damn thing smells like, right? Obviously, almost 5 minutes in, haven't mentioned the smell yet. So Paco Rabanne did come out with a sport flanker in '85 or '86. I'm a little fuzzy on dates with that one. But they came out with a sport flanker to the original Paco Rabanne, which extended the shelf life a little bit on Pour Homme. Like I said, it was a bit stayed by that point, but it was still hanging on. It was still a good seller. You know, people were still wearing Brut in the '80s too, and the Brut came out in '64. So some things are just evergreen like that. They stay popular for decades. And Paco Rabanne Pour Homme was more or less like that. It retained some modicum of success into the '80s and '90s. but it wasn't the flagship anymore. They needed a new flagship. So after the Sport Flanker, out rolls this. Now, I've pronounced this incorrectly in the past. I've called it Ténéré. I've called it Ténéré. It's Ténéré. And I've had to look up the phonetic pronunciation guide. And evidently, these little lines over the E like that, if it's one E, it's pronounced like E. If it's two E's together and a dash over one of them, that's an A sound, like the letter A. So when you see concentré, right, that's concentré. If you take off one of the E's and you just have the one hyphen and the E, that's an E sound, like beat or street. So this is Ténéré. And you got to roll the R a bit and put like a Ténéré, like that, Ténéré. But I am not French, nor am I Klingon. I'm not going to, okay, I can't do that. I wasn't born to speak like I'm getting ready to spit in your face, all right? So I'm not going to make that attempt. Now, back onto the fragrance. So, the reason why this was such a failure was they bet on the fragrances of Kouros and Boss No. 1 and things like Lapidus Pour-Homme. They bet on that becoming the new prevailing style. Zino Davidoff, all of those musky, floral, animalic perfumes that mixed rose and civet and sandalwood and go in that real sort of like Middle Eastern attar direction. That was starting to take over by then, leading all the way up into the early 90s with stuff like Balenciaga Pour-Homme from 1990, Elvis by Elvis Presley in 89, MD Morabito in 89. All of those really musky, pissy, sort of oud adjacent, but not quite. That real just animalic, floral, musky, woody smells. People thought because Kouros was so successful, because Boss, later called Boss No. 1, was so successful, because Zino Davidoff with its wilted flower accord mixed into the fougere with the lavender and the rose, they thought that was going to be the future, that all the fragrances for men were going that way. Even as late as the mid-90s, we had stuff like Joint by Rocco Barocco coming out. That was that pissy. Lord Molyneux is another one from 88 that came out. Sybaris by Antonio Puig came out in 88. All of them have the same thing in common, guys. They all have this really musky, urinous, slightly fecal smell to them that has flowers on top of it. Furio by Jacques Bogart is yet another example. Furio, that floral, musky, return to the 18th century, powdered wig macaronis. Maybe it's because in the 80s, Amadeus was a successful film by Milos Forman, where everyone saw Barry Lyndon or something and thought that was the future too, with the fake beauty mark and the powdered wigs and, the pistol duels at the end and all that stuff. Or they were just doing a bunch of coke, because this is the 80s, okay? We're talking the late 80s. All of the marketing guys at Paco Rabanne probably had crazy hair and triangular shirts, and they were all doing lines of coke in the bathroom while listening to Huey Lewis and going out in their Lamborghini Countaches and doing donuts in the parking lot. I don't fucking know. Bon Jovi, Boy George, Pete Burns with Dead or Alive, Bronski Beat, okay, Kate Bush, all that music, all that culture, really loud, extroverted, sexed up MTV, okay, Sebastian Bach saying she's only 17. No, that was Kip Winger. Sebastian Bach had 18 in life. Don't let me get those confused, all right? Or all of the Skid Row fans and Winger fans are going to come into my comment section and beat me up, all right? I was a chicken nugget in the 80s, so I have a hard time remembering some of those bands, because when I was a little kid, I listened to Michael Jackson and Madonna and Debbie Gibson and Rick Astley and Billy Ocean. That's what I listened to when I was a little sprout, all the pop music. I didn't realize what hair metal was until after hair metal was already over. So we're talking preteens. I'm 11, 12, 13 years old, 91, 92 years, 93. Grunge was already a thing. And I learned after the fact that all these hair metal bands were what was popular, and now Nirvana and Soundgarden and all that other stuff and Mudhoney, they were all replacing that sound. And I was like, oh yeah, these guys suck. Later on, I changed my tune because I realized that back in the 80s when I was a little kid, I heard all this stuff on the radio, like Quiet Riot, Twisted Sister, and I didn't like it then, but later on I came on to it and I discovered it was actually good music. They just had a goofy look. They had a real goofy look. That's it, you know. So if you close your eyes and you don't look at Boy George, or you don't look at Dee Snider, or you don't look at Bon Jovi or whoever, you just listen to the music, it's actually good. You know, if you don't like all of the clown makeup and stuff and the big teased up triangle hair, the whole Rosanna Dana, Gilda Radner thing is not your vibe, just close your eyes. Just close your eyes. So I will give you the same advice actually for this fragrance. If you don't like the packaging, it does look like a Life Bar from Mega Man. Those of you out there who remember Mega Man from the 80s, the first Mega Man for the NES, and it's like and the bar goes and it fills up like that. That's exactly what this looks like. It looks like the Mega Man Life Bar. It even has the little lines. See, the little Mega Man Life Bar lines. You can't unsee it now. You can't take it back. Now the smell. As you know, musky floral, sandalwood. Reminds me a lot of Attar by Montal. If you've smelled that fragrance from 2005, one of the earliest Montal fragrances, if you've smelled Attar, you probably already know what this smells like. And it just gives you an idea of what they were trying to push back then. All the guys who were used to shave foam and Irish Spring soap and all these clean smells, and suddenly they were being sold this. That smells like civet, it smells like sandalwood, rose and carnation, lily of the valley, petitgrain. All right, I even get little bits of hyraceum in here. And editor's note, there's no hyraceum in this, but the perfumer, again, the same one that made Drakkar Noir, did his best to give an impression of hyraceum. So hyraceum is a material that major oil houses have never really dealt with, because the way you get hyraceum is from the droppings of a certain desert mouse called the hyraceum. Literally the name of the material is the name of the animal that makes the material. So you get the hyraceum from the hyraceum mouse after it pops a squat and drops one, and you collect the droppings and then you process those droppings into the material. So IFF and Givaudan and all those guys, they don't really want to deal with rat poop, do they? So Firmenich had a hyraceum material for a long time, one of the few major oil houses that dealt with a true hyraceum material. But even they, just this year, they backed out. They're like, no, we're not doing it anymore. So editor's note, if you are an artisanal perfumer in 2024 and you want to put hyraceum in your perfume, you've got to buy those turds yourself, or you got to go out to North Africa, wherever it is, scrape them off the desert, ground, and then go process them on your own. Do a Russian atom or something and make your own hyraceum. It's the only way you're going to get it now, because it's not really distributed by any of the suppliers. It's never really been popular. Like oud, it was always kind of just a regional flavor for the perfumes down there. But again, Pierre Warguenet did his best job of emulating it here. So you get a bit of a hyraceum, civet, sandalwood, sort of oak moss base, and then you get the rose, the carnation, the jasmine, the lily of the valley, all of that 1700s floral nonsense with the powdered wigs and the fake beauty mark and all that stuff. And then the top notes are petitgrain, it's bergamot. Again, if you've smelled Attar by Montal, very similar to this. Now the thing is about Ténéré, came out in '88, big advertising push, cool packaging with a bunch of red straps on it, looked really cool. This bottle is a bit of an acquired taste, granted. Really cool look though. And then within just a short number of years, because like I said, we were going towards aquatic things, Cool Water came out the same year as this in '88. Cool Water came out in '88. New West came out in '88. Attorney for Men came out in '89. Kenzo came out in '90. it was over, okay? They had a good ride, but it wasn't the direction people wanted to go in. They wanted to go in a cleaner, more aquatic, more ozonic direction. So Paco Rabanne basically had to retract the fragrance from the market and then apologize and put out something else. So by 1993, we had Excess Pour Homme, which was Paco Rabanne's version of that Eternity-style fragrance. Much punchier, much sharper, more geranium, mint in that fragrance, very woody, not as sweet as Eternity for Men, but still in the wheelhouse. And then that would become the true successor to Paco Rabanne Pour Homme from 73, was Excess Pour Homme, because it was a fougere, it was wet shaving adjacent, it was fresh, it was minty, it had geranium. It was a perfect modernized update of the very thing that Paco Rabanne had been known for since the 70s with the original Pour Homme. This is before they got into sweet fragrances, guys. Remember, Paco Rabanne was not always about big heavy slugs of ethyl maltol, big heavy slugs of tonka. That wouldn't come around until Ultraviolet. 2001, Jacques Cavalier created Ultraviolet. That was the first real club banger, Paco Rabanne. Then that was followed up by 1 Million in 2008, and then Invictus in 2013 with the bubblegum, bay leaf, olive brine accord mixed in with all the shower gel stuff. So by that point, Paco Rabanne had gone down the path of the dark side and became the fuckboy fragrance, basically. The brand of fragrances for all the fuckboys out there who go to the clubs and think they're going to get some action because they're wearing 50 sprays of Invictus to the forehead or whatever, and got their collars popped up past their heads like Count Dracula. It's going to get them laid. So obviously Paco Rabanne has some image issues, some reputation issues, but they weren't doing that back then. So instead, what they were trying to do was be a respectable brand that delivered signature fragrances for guys. But they had a weird little blip when they released this in 1988, not 2008. What am I talking about here? So here's the thing, guys. For as good as this fragrance smells, it also reminds me a bit of the Carpet Fresh carpet deodorizer. You remember the can with the pink label? You sprinkle on your carpets, you vacuum it up. There is unfortunately a bit of that in here. This came out before Carpet Fresh did. So I would venture a guess that because this is such a failed fragrance, that the formula or a mod of this formula was likely sold to Carpet Fresh. And they took out the animalics, they took out the civet notes, they took out the musk, just kept the floral profile. So if you're someone who uses a lot of Carpet Fresh because you've got dogs or something, and you smell this, you may not like this because you're going to be like, oh, that just smells like a musky version of Carpet Fresh. So me, I don't use Carpet Fresh. I'm aware of it, okay? I can get what people are saying with this. Like, I get it. But it's not a deal breaker for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't own 3 bottles of it. Clearly, I wouldn't buy 3 bottles of a perfume that I thought smelled like carpet deodorizer. But I need to throw it out there. It's got to be thrown out there. And then the other thing, sprayers on these. You guys know that if a bottle was made in the 1980s and it was one of the natural spray, that it's Russian roulette with these sprayers. So I bought 3 bottles of this 5 years ago when it was only 60, 70 bucks a bottle. Because remember, nobody wanted this. It's only $200 a bottle now because a lot of YouTubers run out there and flap their gums about how it's a lost masterpiece and a gem, and it's like an orgasm in a bottle, and you better run out and get 20 of them. Do it now. Why are you watching my video? Go out and buy 30 of these. Right? All that stupid shit. So they drive the prices through the roof because all of the hysterical people with deep pockets and 2 fucking brain cells to rub together run out and go, oh, I better get my backups. So me, I love this stuff, and it was cheap. So I'm like, okay, it's cheap. I'll buy 3 of them because I love it and it's cheap. I actually had the intention of maybe trading one away at some point because 3 is still too many. Typically, I only have 1 backup of a fragrance, not 2 or 3 or 4. I don't like having a perfume store in my house. I don't. But this one was just too cheap. So for $1.50, I had 3 of these. However, I got about this far through the first bottle. So I put a good dent in it. I got a quarter of the way through the bottle, and then suddenly the sprayer quit. And it wasn't the spray head, it wasn't this mechanism, because I actually took this one off of this bottle and put the other one from the broken bottle on, and I switched them. And this one still worked, and the broken one was still broken. So it was definitely the internal mechanism here that died. And clean it out with a pin. You can stick a needle down in there and try and unclog it if it's clogged. Didn't do nothing. So I'm guessing the plunger, the spring, whatever it was, just after being 35 years old, and being sprayed like 50 times, it just shit itself. So I'm going to warn you guys, you buy the spray bottle version, which is this one, you might have a problem with the sprayer. It's the same thing that happens to old Bogart perfumes, happens to old Balenciaga. So Balenciaga Pour Homme, their sprayers like to quit. Furio, their sprayers like to quit. A lot of the Capucci fragrances from back then too. Capucci Pour Homme, Arte Capucci, Punjab. The sprayers like to quit on those. I don't know what it is about 80s sprayers, but they like to quit. So just beware. You might just want to get a splash. The splashes are a little bit fatter, a little bit more squat. They don't look as much like a Mega Man Life Bar like this does, but they have the same form factor. And if you get a splash, you won't have to worry about the sprayer quitting on you. Now I've got a bottle that I've got to cut open at some point and decant into something else, and then that's just going to look like shit. So I ended up breaking out one of my backups, and now I'm using this as my main, and my partial with the broken sprayer is now just for a rainy day when I feel like doing MacGyver to it and cutting it open. I don't feel like doing it now, but just be aware if you go after this. And that's really it, guys. I mean, something like this nowadays, if you were to buy a perfume made like this, it would come from a house like Aries Lador, would come from a house like Darren Allen, would come from a house like maybe Clandestine Laboratories would concoct something like this. Il Profumo would do something like this, or Papillon will come out with a fragrance like this. Mask Milano would do a fragrance like this with the muskiness. Once upon a time, I would say L'Artisan, because L'Artisan had Michant Loup and they had the Zing, but they don't do this kind of fragrances anymore because Puig owns them now. But I would once upon a time say that this could be a L'Artisan style fragrance, but not nowadays. But those other ones I mentioned for sure. Any kind of niche artisanal brand that would fuck with, you know, African rat turds, basically, Hyraceum or Civet, they would possibly do a fragrance like this. But it's mind-blowing when you consider that this was mainstream, or it was an attempt at bringing this style, you know, your African rat turds combined with your Carpet Fresh deodorizer, combined with your powdered wig 1700s noble oligarch Amadeus Mozart, whatever, smash all that up into a weird kaleidoscope and then give it a Culture Club soundtrack, and that's what this was. Like I said, a lot of coke was being done back in the 80s, and this was not something that was ever going to be successful, not then, and obviously not now. But it's fun, and if you can get your hands on it without losing a kidney, then more power to you. This has been my video on Paco Rabanne Ténéré. Have a good one. Catch you next time.